Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best and worst Vaughan Williams symphony sets in boxes. This is really kind of an amazing talk to do. And the reason is because some of you who are too young to remember the dawn of the recorded era, as I do, well, not really, but the stereo era, which sort of is a little bit more apropos, I grew up listening to two Vaughan Williams cycles. There were only two. There was Adrian Bull in stereo, because his mono Decca one was not complete and had sort of disappeared, and Andre Previn on RCA. One was with the London Symphony, one was mostly with the London Philharmonic. It was very, very interesting. That was all there was. There were singleton performances of individual symphonies. There were a couple extras of the London Symphony. There were a couple extras of the Fourth Symphony. But basically, that was all we had. And it was all we had until well into the CD era. Because all of the other cycles that we have, I'm looking at this thing, making sure, are digital. Yep, they're all digital recordings. And they came out on compact disc. So the idea of doing multiple Vaughan Williams cycles on compact disc or anywhere else is a relatively new thing. It was a product of that insane period after the invention of the CD in the 80s and 90s, when the record labels went insane and recorded tons and tons of everything. And at that point, most of the major labels were still located or headquartered in London. London was the center of the recording industry. It really isn't anymore, but it was then. And so making Vaughan Williams cycles was something that appealed to these Englishly run labels or their English headquarters, at least some of them. And as far as others went, well, conductors were desperate for new repertoire that was tonal and attractive, and labels would basically let them do anything they wanted to do. And so we got Vaughan Williams cycles, and now there are 8 of them. I counted them all here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, 8 Vaughan Williams cycles in a box that you can get, and only 8. There are other almost complete, quasi-complete cycles and things that exist again as singleton releases. And there are quite a bit more than there were back in the 60s and 70s. But there are 8 cycles to choose from, and I'm going to run through them and tell you everything you need to know. It's actually a fairly simple story. Now, the symphonies themselves, for those of you who don't know them, are absolutely glorious works, fascinating works, and very, very different from one to the other. Vaughan Williams had an extremely wide range of styles, stylistic range, I should say, expressive range, from tremendous violence of the Fourth Symphony, which kind of sounds like a Godzilla movie. I always thought it was, Godzilla Eats Tokyo, if Tokyo were situated in the English countryside. That's what it would be. It's a Godzilla movie. From the crazy violence of the Fourth Symphony to the unbelievably transfigured, luminous, spiritual, visionary is the word often used, intensity of the Fifth Symphony. And then there's the spacey stuff, the Symphonia Antarctica, which was a film score originally, and the very, very ethereal, spaced out, but still colorful, quieter passages of the Ninth Symphony. There's just a tremendous amount of interesting music here. I think one of the things that has prevented these works from achieving greater popularity is the fact that A, nobody cares about them outside of England, and although a bit in the United States. I mean, I've done them. I've played a few of them in my community orchestra. We had a blast doing them. But the other problem is that only 2 of them end with a thump. That's the 4th and the 8th. All of the others end quietly. And that is a problem in concert because it raises the issue of when do you do them? They're not terribly long. It's not like Mahler's Ninth, which, that ends quietly, but it ends quietly, or even Mahler's Fourth. But after just a big, long, meaty pile of Sturm und Drang, so that the quiet ending is so right and so poetic that nobody questions it because you've gotten your money's worth. But these are shorter works. They're more in keeping with the classical concept of proportion and tradition, although they're quite interesting formally, fascinating formally. But they don't have those crowd-pleasing perorations. And that's an issue. It's actually an issue. I don't know how serious it is nowadays, but it hasn't prevented them, of course, from being recorded. Thank goodness. Now, we first need to start in talking about cycles with Adrian Bull's Decca Mono cycle, which only went through number 8, although there is a recording of number 9. It's in stereo, and it's on another label. It was on the Everest label. And I don't know how many of you remember that one. I mean, it really was kind of interesting because it had this spoken little prelude by Sir Adrian. You know, he says, "We had hoped that our dear friend Sir Ralph Vaughan Williams could have been with us today in the studio as we made this recording of his last symphony. Unfortunately, his death occurred just 7 hours, 16 minutes and 8 seconds before we were scheduled to begin our work on it. It is wonderful, however, that our friends in the United States will be able to hear this, his last symphony." Okay, boys, that's it. Blimey, the mic's still on? Oh my, turn it off. Well, okay, it didn't go exactly that way, but, something like that. It had this cute little superscription, and then there was a dynamite performance of the Ninth Symphony with Adrian Bull in the London Philharmonic, but it wasn't part of the box. And as far as those earlier Decca recordings go, they are, of course, in somewhat attenuated sound sonically. And the London Philharmonic was a scruffy orchestra at the best of times. During the 1950s, they were in the rebuilding phase after the war. And so I really think that, some of those performances are more exciting than Bolt's later ones, but they aren't competitive in a lot of other ways. So I'm not going to worry about that because it's incomplete and because it's older and it's not really as pleasurable to listen to in many respects. So we're going to talk about stereo and box sets which are complete, not the things which are not complete. And the worst ever Vaughan Williams cycle, the worst, bar none, hands down, is Bernard Haitink's. This is Bernard Haitink. He has Bolt's orchestra, the London Philharmonic, and this is the dullest, sleepiest, snooziest, heaviest, most slack-jawed, colorless, comatose, brain-dead collection of Vaughan Williams symphonies that you will ever hear in your life. Nor is it particularly well recorded. It's just awful in every respect. And, of course, it got wonderful reviews because of its probity, its seriousness, its measured tempos. In other words, boring. But there is nothing that English critics like better than when they can get a foreign conductor and an English orchestra to get a hold of their native son, someone like Vaughan Williams, and do something to his music. What he does doesn't matter. They don't care as long as it's done. And they can rave and jump up and down and be as nice as can be and speak with incredible knowledge. And the duller it is, the more they like it. Because boring is good. But try and learn how to read, especially like gramophone reviews, between the lines a little bit. When something is boring, they talk about refusal to whip up excitement, as if that's a good thing, or things like that. And again, austerity and seriousness and intellectual depth. All of those, profundity, all of those are buzzwords for boring, and this is all of those. Boring beyond belief. So avoid Haitink. That's the one you gotta hate. It sucks. Ugh, horrible. So then the rest of these are all really pretty good. They really are. They have their ups and downs. Some of them are variable, and the next the next two of them, I would say, fall into the more variable category. Well, they're all variable. What can I say? They all have their pluses and minuses. There isn't one totally complete cycle that is absolutely perfect in my view, because I just think the music has too much of a range and there's too much stuff that could go wrong on the day. So, so we're just talking about games of comparisons now. Really, we are. The Nexus Box. Here it is. The Nexus Box. Now, this is actually quite good, and it features the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra and Chorus, and under two different conductors, Kees Bakkels and Paul Daniel. And there's very little to choose between them. I mean, they're good, solid performances. They are not the best. There is no single performance in here that I would call the best in its class. But they're well recorded, well played, idiomatic, serious performances that really, if you get one, you're not going to be unhappy. You really aren't. But you can do better in all of them. And so this is sort of a workman-like set, but it's a good set. It's a good set. I have to be, give it its props, and it has its moments. Similar to that, in certain respects, is this one. This is Bryden Thompson on Chandos. Now, this was going to be exciting because Bryden Thompson was an interesting conductor. He did some really cool things, but he was a very inconsistent conductor. His best work on disc was his Martineau Symphony cycle. These symphonies were let down, not so much by Thompson, because I think his approach to the music is pretty solid throughout this cycle. It's the sonics. It was the engineering. Chandos had such a reputation for making those early blockbuster digital recordings, and they were doing English music, as a specialty. And so we were all rooting for these, but some of them sound fantastic. For example, the Fourth Symphony, which is a slam bang performance. It's absolutely terrific. But there are others, such as the London Symphony and the Sixth to a certain extent, that they're just very soft-edged, strangely soft-edged. It's one of those sort of blowsy recordings that makes the music sound diffuse. And Thompson was not a disciplinarian. He wasn't the kind of guy to keep the music together in the most rhythmically strict way. And when you combine that with the somewhat flabby recorded sound, the result is performances that are somewhat hit and miss. The same thing happens in the Pastoral Symphony, the Third. And that was the first symphony by Vaughan Williams that I heard. And I have a special love for it for that reason, I think. It's such an amazing combination of something that sounds very, very old and ancient and timeless, but also completely modern. It's a brilliant, brilliant work. Tovey described the music as having quiet power and massive silence. Those kinds of terms come to mind when you think of that music, the Third Symphony. And I would start with that one. I really would. I think it contains everything that Vaughan Williams has got in him and will do later, even some of the dissonant stuff. I mean, it's generally mellow, but wow, what an amazing piece. Anyway, I just had to say that because it's so wonderful. But there are also, like I said, marvelous performances in here. And but you can do better. And it may be that Chandos knew that, because they started doing another cycle with Richard Hickox, which is not in the box. I don't think they ever finished it. I'm not 100% sure. I was looking today just to see if it was ever completed. I don't keep it because they were horrible performances. They were really bad. I mean, Hickox was a wonderful conductor of choral music, really fabulous conductor of choral music. But as an orchestral performer, he had his ups and downs, and his Vaughan Williams was a down. So avoid Hickox's performances. Especially, they did the original version of the London Symphony No. 2, and that was before Vaughan Williams trimmed it and cut it and put it into final shape. And the final shape is so much better than the original shape. It's like one of those Bruckner situations. They've done the original, we heard it, they put it out as an SACD. It was another one of those Chandos recordings that didn't sound very good, lacking in brilliance on top. It was terrible. So just forget about that. You don't need it, not even as a supplement. So Hickox is to be avoided. Thompson is pretty good, but not the best. Next, we have to consider Vernon Handley. Vernon Handley was sort of, wait a minute, this isn't Vernon Handley. This is Adrian Bull. This is the other Adrian. This is the other Adrian Bull. So we're not going to do that yet. Let's talk about Vernon Handley. That box is over there. So I grabbed the wrong box. Sorry, folks. Vernon Handley, he has his followers. He was kind of like Adrian Bull with more rhythm and better orchestral discipline, but also with a certain coolness and lack of personality, I think, in his interpretations. He did some marvelous, marvelous things. He performed yeoman service for English music. His Vaughan Williams cycle is very consistent and very well played and completely idiomatic in its interpretations. It's a good, solid Vaughan Williams cycle all the way through. It has no weak links. It really doesn't. The problem, again, is the sonics. It was an early EMI digital recording, and there was a peculiarity of the way that they recorded, where as the volume gets louder, it sounds bigger but not louder. I don't know how else to describe it. There's like a compression in the waveform, or if you actually record it on one of those programs, to make like samples that I do, you find that it's recorded at an extremely low level. And as it gets louder, it doesn't have any more impact. It's like filling up the space, but it still doesn't go anywhere. Very odd. And that really sabotages Handley's performance. Not in every symphony. 2 and 8 are pretty good. His 8th is wonderful. And so there are good ones. But 5 was such a letdown. They're just one after the other. You never know what you're going to get. So Handley is, again, as an interpreter, he's first class. He really is. But as a rewarding listening experience, variable. Much, much better in that case was Andrew Davis. I never understood this box. It says Vaughan Williams, the symphonies, plus other couplings and goodies. And then it says Ralph Vaughan Williams with his date. Ralph. His name was Rafe. I know it was Rafe, but I'm guessing Rafe. Ugh, Ralph. Anyway, if you'd wanted to be called Rafe, you should have taken the L out, don't you think? Anyway, this is a very, very consistently good cycle. It really is. The 4th and the 6th are not quite as ferocious, I think, as they could be. I think the Pastoral Symphony has its slack moments. A few of them here or there, but generally speaking, again, a very solid performances, a very solid cycle, very well recorded. The sound is beautiful. This is with the BBC Symphony. It's really a lovely set, and I enjoy it very much. It also gives you Job with the 9th Symphony, which is wonderful. Now, of course, Chandos has started doing Vaughan Williams again with Andrew Davis. Why? Including a 9th Symphony with Job, which is just as good as this 9th Symphony with Job. And I talked about that in my video on Job, so you can go see more about it there. But it's a very, very good cycle, and having Job is pretty cool. So, then we got the one I was talking about at the beginning, Previn with the London Symphony. Now, this one occasioned a lot of attention and still gets a lot of attention by those sentimental for the days when there were only 2 Vaughan Williams cycles around, Adrian Bull and Andre Previn. But this cycle, as time has gone on, has not worn as well as it might have. It has some astoundingly fine performances. The C Symphony is really great, Symphony number 1. This performance of a London Symphony may be the best on disc. It's tremendous. And it comes with a sensational overture to the Wasps. The Pastoral Symphony is great. The 5th Symphony is magical, absolutely gorgeous, and better than Previn's remake, because he actually remade it twice. He remade it once for Telarc and once on EMI. Believe it or not, I don't think many people will remember the EMI one. That was a digital one with, I think, some sort of youth orchestra or something. I don't even remember. I have it sitting in the overflow room where it will stay. It is overflow by very definition. But those performances are wonderful. On the other hand, and the Antarctica is great here, although it has these spoken superscriptions with John Gielgud superscribing before each movement. I think the spoken bits should be left out. Vaughan Williams did not ask that they be included, and they don't help. Nevertheless, Good performances. The eighth is kind of dry and dusty. I don't know how to describe it. It just doesn't have the sparkle the music needs. The fourth and the sixth, the two really violent ones, where you think that Previn, who did that dynamite Walton first with the LSO, would really nail them, he doesn't. He just doesn't. They're just a little bit too soft-edged. And it was a real shocker, really quite the surprise. But for the most part, it's a very, very good cycle. It really is. I wish that 4, 6, 8, and 9 to a certain extent too had a little bit more glitter, a bit more color, and a little more muscle. What can you do? Then we come to, yes, here it is. This is Adrian Bull, his second one, his stereo version. This is absolutely one of the best out there, and I think it's essential. I think you have to hear it. He knew the composer. He knew the music. Yes, his late performances were a little slower, a little less disciplined, a little bit more slackly held. You're not going to hear the violence in the fourth and the sixth that you may want. But then again, the performances themselves, the approach was not conducive to that. So you don't feel that you're missing something in the same way you do with Previn's, for example. But boy, these are great. These are just, everywhere else, they're just wonderful. Symphonies, the C Symphony is great. A London Symphony is fantastic. The Pastoral Symphony is great. The Fifth is great. The Antarctica is amazingly wonderful. See, the thing that Bolt had, even when he was like 175 and nearing death, he always let the music play. He let the musicians play. And if they knew the music, he let them play. You got wonderful results. He was not averse to color. He was not averse to climaxes that had, lots of percussion and stuff going on. So although the performances have a certain genial warmth, shall we say, they never sound underpowered. They never sound slack. And that is really what you want. It's really what you need. And it's really a lovely, lovely set. And you can get it that way. This was the older box, the one I actually pulled out first before I forgot and thought this was Handley, which it just wasn't. But it's really, this one has, all like the other stuff, orchestral works he did. There's more stuff in here. The old EMI set. But this is the newer EMI, now Warner set. And it's great. It's just great. If you're going to have, you should have a couple of Vaughan Williams cycles because you should always hear a range of interpretations. Bolt is definitely one of them. However, if I'm going to pick one, it's the other RCA, Slatkin. Slatkin with the Philharmonia. First of all, he's got the Philharmonia, which sounds great in this music. Second of all, the only interpretation in this entire set that might be a little bit disappointing is a London Symphony. And some people like it much better than I do. And my only feeling about it is that in the first movement, it's a little bit too fast. It doesn't allow time for the gnarliness of the writing. With the first orchestra comes crashing in at that first big climax where it goes, yeah, da 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 da. He really pushes it and plays it very quickly. It's very exciting, very, very exciting. But I like to hear a more measured and emphatic approach to rhythm than Slatkin takes. That's me. But these performances are 100% consistent. You get the best versions of the fourth and sixth in any of the complete cycles. They are really, really thrilling, violent where need be, and meltingly lyrical. The fifth is great. The Antarctica is amazing with bass frequencies that will blow your subwoofers into another county. Unbelievable. A glittering, wonderful eighth, because the Eighth Symphony has that concluding toccata with the tuned gongs and glockenspiels and vibraphones and all that stuff. It's very, very beautiful. A wonderfully taut and exciting account of the ninth, which can really fall apart if you don't hold it together. It's a great cycle. It's really the best one out there, the most consistently fine of all of them. But I think Bolt's authority isn't challenged. This is a different view. But for a first encounter with these symphonies, one where, and it's cheap. I just looked it up on Amazon. It's like $23 for the whole box. And so's Previn's. These are very inexpensive. There's no reason not to get all of them. There really isn't. So for your first Vaughan Williams symphony experience, you want to have a cycle that will give you a really solid, consistent view of all of the symphonies. And this one, Slatkins, is the one that does it. So essentially, where does this leave us, folks? Essentially, it's really very simple. All you need to know is avoid Haitink. Avoid Haitink. Avoid Haitink. If you come away with anything from this talk, avoid Haitink. Avoid Haitink. All the others will give you plenty of pleasure. And as you get to know the works well, of course, you will develop your own preferences and your own conception of how they should go. And you'll be able to make up your own mind about how all of these various performances compare and contrast in sound. In the meantime, I think it's absolutely wonderful that we have 8 Vaughan Williams cycles. I mean, who would have guessed? Isn't that just fabulous? I'm totally over the moon about it. I really am, because this is great music. It's as great a symphony cycle, I think, as anyone ever did by any composer anywhere. It is a major collection of masterpieces that really realize what a symphony is supposed to do, that has that range, the vision, the questing spirit. It's all in here. So if you don't know your Vaughan Williams symphonies, do take some time to get to know them. You will be very, very happy that you did. I guarantee it. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. Go listen to Vaughan Williams. Take care.